Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of From a Woman to a Leader. And today we're going to talk about mastering assertiveness, and setting boundaries. And I'm super excited to have Cara Tuttle here. And she is a speaker, an author, consultant, and activist-minded, educated, with nearly 20 years experience working in higher education. She's also an author of Drowning in Timidity, Women, Politeness, and the Power of Assertive Living, and has contributed chapters to various books and publishers, including The Future Female Leader, Preparing Girls and Women to Lead the World, The Female Code. Wow, that's impressive. The list goes on. I just want to dive into the conversation. So thank you so much, Cara, for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
And this topic of assertiveness is very, very top of mind for me because I just had a circle of women, incredible women, and they talked about assertiveness and how they are perceived sometimes as aggressive. So we may get to that. But before they do that, first of all, anything that you would like to share about yourself that they haven't? Sorry, I want to make sure that I properly presented you, and if there's anything I omitted, please let me know.
Oh, I mean, thank you for the bio. That is what I've done recently, but what I would be happy to share is that I grew up in a very rural area. I was actually very shy, really up until I would say young adulthood. And I went to law school, which was the best thing I ever did for myself, but very challenging. So the assertiveness journey for me has really been a personal journey. And then with the work that I do now, um, like my main job is doing sexual assault prevention out on college campus, and so assertiveness and boundary setting is just a part of that every single day. But I have learned it, and what I want people to know is that this is a skill that can be learned, and you can turn it on and you can turn it off. And so I'm very excited to hear that a group of women were talking about it. I think we actually find ourselves talking about it a lot, even when we don't know that that's actually the topic. So I'm, excited to jump in and discuss more.
Yeah, and it's very good. You mentioned like you're kind of shy, and the reason it's good because a lot of times we tend to think that other people that we see as assertive, like, oh, they were born that way, they were always been that. Oh, they're so lucky.
Yes.
It's
Yeah. I'm actually an introvert, and sometimes when I do public speaking or like I'm on, like I'm on at work, and I'm being very assertive sometimes because it's the right thing to do. I do hear that. I do hear that from younger women a lot. And they were like, oh, you were just born with it. And I'm like, no, no, like all of this actually is 40 plus years of life experience and learning. And I, felt very insecure. I felt I had imposter syndrome early in my career. Like it's challenging for me. I'm glad to hear it looks effortless to them now, but it still doesn't feel that way, right? It's still, even when I know how to do it, and I've read so many books on it, and I research it, and now I've written about it, it still requires preparation and a big expenditure of energy, sometimes some recovery time, some post-anxiety sometimes. I mean, that's all real. The fear is there, but you do it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your journey. Like you said, you were a shy young adult and eventually became influential, in addressing sexual harassment and promoting gender equity.
Oh, um, I'm really satisfied at this point with how my career's turned out, but also I, didn't know that it was going to work out along the way. I think it's really important for younger women in particular to know that, like if you look me up on LinkedIn, and that outlines your career journey, it looks like it all makes sense, but it wasn't like that at all. It didn't feel that linear. But all of these things are really connected because growing up, it was a very small town, a very isolated town. It's not the suburb of anything. My dad worked for the railroad. My mom was a teacher. Actually, all the women like she has several sisters. All the women in my family were teachers. And so I have a sister, my sister and I both ended up in higher education. So, we did try to generationally go a step further, but we ended up working in education. It's just, a main value. And for me, it was a ticket out. The home in which I grew up in, was a home in which there was domestic violence. My mother experienced that. There was love in their marriage, but there was also turmoil in their marriage. And I saw that in my aunt's family. I saw that really in a lot of women across the town. It has all of the conditions. It's an economically depressed area, job shortages, high rates of alcohol consumption. So there was a lot of things going on that, I understand academically now, but I didn't when I was a child growing up. So early on, I just thought, I didn't want my life to be like that, right? I wanted more options, and it just was tumultuous, and people who go through that, they know that it's like not every day is like that. There's actually like a lot of love and joy in my childhood, but I just didn't want to feel trapped. And so that was actually driving a lot of my personal ambition to get out of the town. I also wanted to see the world. I was an avid reader, and I just read about all of these things, and leaving the small town was necessary to do that. So I had this inner desire for all of that, but did feel very self-conscious and hesitant. And I wanted to be a good public speaker, but I was so nervous about it. I mean, this is really the journey up until my early 20s, right? So I'm taking public speaking in undergrad, and I still feel very hesitant about that. Like, I think part of it was I'd get up there and get started, but then I'd lose confidence a little bit, right? And so that's where I started reading books, and just this is a personal journey of development on persuasion. Books like Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office, that was a main one. It's still very relevant. Like, if depending on which edition you'd find, some of the information can seem a little dated by 2023 standards, but there's so much really good advice in there, little worksheets. And so that, for me, it really just helped things click. And so I went to law school thinking, really kind of narrowly, because I hadn't had exposure to this. No one in my family was a lawyer, but I just thought, that's a good job. That's steady work. That will give me financial freedom, in a relationship to leave if I need to, and maybe I can help some people along the way. But along the way, navigating this world in a woman's body, I experienced a lot of sexual harassment and a lot of situations that felt uncomfortable, and my women friends would share that, and we didn't know what to do, and we weren't getting any good sex education, if we got any at all, and if we did get talk about bodies, it was just focused on our body and not the bodies of others, and it didn't include any information on consent or boundary setting. And so for me, the journey felt like fumbling along the way and trying to figure it out. But as I learned more, I always tried to bring other women with me. And I became a person in each job that someone said, like, oh, go talk to Cara. You can talk to Cara. She'll either go with you, she'll at least sit with you, or validate your anger, or, figure out what the process is. And eventually that became my full-time job, which I love, but I have a job now that I didn't even know existed back when I was, in high school, or choosing to go to law school. So for me, it's a calling, and it's a great use of my skill set, but it's absolutely been a journey, and a lot of learning and experience that makes me now good at what I do.
That's a great story, very inspiring. And thank you so much for sharing and being so transparent about the adversity you had, as a child. And yeah, I can relate at least to what you mentioned about the journey, and how life leads you to your destiny, to what you're supposed to be doing. And that's great. It doesn't happen to everyone. So we are lucky.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
it does. And I'm happy to share, because I know now many, many people have experiences that have interfered with their dreams, but also with their health and well-being. And we get so many messages about suffering in silence, or we might feel some shame and self-blame about that. And so, I try to be as transparent as possible to say that, like, it's okay to acknowledge what has happened or what the challenge is. These things are part of life too. And I mean, sure, I can get up and put on a face and a dress and go out and tackle the world, but there's a real person in there, who has to rise to that challenge on a daily basis and keep at it to be successful. So what I say in my book, which I think is really important, is that, like, once you learn assertiveness, you've got to bring others with you. Otherwise, we're not creating any change in the world. And that's the one thing I thought was missing when I was researching this for my own book. Is I was getting all of these messages that are really great about personal self-development, but it was stopping short of viewing it as any sort of collective or community responsibility. And that can happen officially or unofficially. Like, you were talking, you were in a circle, you were talking in a group of women. I mean, the spillover effects or the butterfly effect of that can really improve people's lives. And it's what we know is it's never too late to start.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think women needs to talk with other women and relate to other. I mean, that's what I see in the circles that I run. I mean, I'm not just the one telling them, how to be assertive, but just the fact that it is a topic of conversation and women share experiences. It's so powerful. It's so impactful.
We learn lessons, right? It's not like I know how to handle everything perfectly. And there's different
Absolutely.
situations that are more challenging for me than others. And so, one person tells us what worked for them, and it can be a real light bulb moment, and we can take that and, apply it to our lives. That's the goal.
Yeah. And I really want to dive into, like, the thing that was top of mind in the conversation I had last week, that women shared that they are assertive. They're basically trying to be assertive, and they're being told that they are aggressive. And I heard it many times. It's not the first time I heard it. So can you share kind of the differences between being assertive and being aggressive, and how can women really tackle those situations?
Well, what, they're not wrong, and they're not misunderstanding a situation. There's really solid research on this for many, many years, that when women are engaging assertively, it can be misinterpreted as aggressive, and that's applied more to women than it is to men, right? So we've given men so much permission, really in personal relationships, to be grumpy, to like things their way, and to not get feedback about that. Also in the workplace, to be leaders, right? To be focused on efficiency and not necessarily politeness, and to make quick decisions, and that gets rewarded as leadership in the male vision, right? And if you think about, I mean, in the US for sure, we're taught so much about military history. We're given this one very narrow version of what courage looks like, or what leadership looks like. And that version has a lot of pros and cons, actually. It doesn't tell the full story. It doesn't really tell women's story. And so that sexism that they're experiencing is very real. But some people do confuse assertiveness with aggressiveness, and aggressiveness or aggression is not the goal. It's not the right thing to do, but also it's just not a good long-term strategy. So assertiveness, if you think, you can think of it as a spectrum. There's also a diagram I like called the assertiveness triangle. I like the triangle, but to each their own. It's really about striking the balance. So we don't want to be passive, which is that we're not engaging, we're not showing up, we're not asking for our wants and needs to be met. Things are happening to us and we're feeling it, but we're internalizing it. It's not very healthy, and it's not going to get you where you want in your personal or professional relationships. Passive aggressive, it's a lot of people's favorite choice. It's a way to send some messages that you're not happy, that your goals aren't being met, that you want more out of a relationship, but you're not articulating that directly. And that ends up backfiring really, is because you want people to read your mind and they can't. You know, they're focused on themselves, how their body feels, their stress, what they have to accomplish during the day. And it would be wonderful if our lives were like that movie, or all the movies where, there's just that magic chemistry and a seamless relationship. But that doesn't happen for very long for most people that I know, right? You can have that like phenomenal chemistry at certain points in a relationship, but eventually you're going to have to do the work of communication to make sure that relationship stays healthy. And healthy relationships have boundaries and conversations. And so assertiveness is really about showing up and where you're allowed to be and engaging authentically, directly, while not trampling or abusing in any way the rights of others, right? So where it turns into aggression is where we're using volume, force, power or authority, whatever personal characteristics. Some people are fine with confrontation. Some people are recoil at that. So people use their tendencies to, bulldoze or steamroll to pressure people into going along with a certain decision or relationship style. That's inappropriate. So for women, it's balancing the reality of what's assertive and what's aggressive, but it's also knowing how you're being perceived. And so to be strategic about it, there are some ways to package it so they shouldn't have to do this, but in certain situations, you want to know how you're going to be interpreted, how that message is going to be received. And so you want to package that strategically, which, and this is very annoying, may be softer or indirect in a way that men currently don't have to be. But it's strategic because you're navigating sexism. It's not like I'm going to fall back into a weaker position, right? Because I don't want anyone in a weaker negotiating position. We're being strategic and harnessing the power of persuasion in the way we deploy assertiveness to get what we want.
Yeah, absolutely. I very much relate to that. I mean, there are a lot of social norms, right? I mean, it goes, I think, way back, centuries back, that women are supposed to be those gentle creatures, are supposed to be supportive, and taking care of the house and all that, the family. And men are supposed to be like the macho figures, the fighters, the hunters, and all that. And it's still, unfortunately, I mean, it hasn't changed, right? It's still perceived that way. And what you're saying, we want to implement assertiveness in a way that will still play along with some of the biases that still exist.
Yes, it just, sorry, I mean to interrupt you,
Yeah,
but like
go ahead.
it just doesn't serve us. I mean, the anger is valid. The irritation is valid. Like if you're coming up against that kind of bias, stereotypes, discrimination, at work or in your personal relationships, I will validate your anger. I mean, I will feel it for you. Like I am annoyed and angry on a regular basis. As I mentioned earlier, my job is handling sexual misconduct. So all of those feelings are valid. But if I went in to every meeting, every conversation angry, what's going to happen? Like people are going to learn not to invite me to the meeting. They're not going to call me. They're going to find me difficult to work with because sometimes I might be, if I'm on the aggression end of that spectrum, right?
Yeah.
That's not where most people want to live. Now, in like Western society and a lot of movies and capitalism can reward that kind of like claw your way to the top mentality for a while. But what we're seeing in research about the workplace, especially, is that is changing and people want a more holistic leadership style. So if we're thinking short term, yes, you could be aggressive and get your way in one meeting, but in the long term, that's not going to make you more effective, right? So there is strategy to it. It's not like I'm going to show up and speak my mind because I have a right to, which many times you do have the right to, but is it going to get you to where you want? That's the question. I'm so glad you brought up politeness, because that socialization of women to just smooth things out and make things better is really entrenched. I mean, it's still real. I see that with like I work with a lot of like 18 to 24-year-old women. I mean, they're still getting those messages. They're still doing the caretaking. They straighten the classroom, they'll do the note taking. So a lot of that just gets passed on and on, even though they've gotten a lot of messages in their life about um, gender equity, and they do feel like more things are right. And I'm glad. I want them to feel entitled to that equality,
Yeah.
right? But they are having a hard time showing up, speaking up, and being firm, just like sitting in the discomfort, which, if you think in terms of like a negotiation, if you're asking for a raise or a salary, whatever it is you're negotiating, you need to make your ask and wait for the answer, not undo your argument, right? And weaken your position before anyone's even said no. And that kind of politeness to fill the time, to smooth the awkwardness over, is really costing us a lot, in both our, personal and professional relationships.
So do you have some maybe tactics or specific examples? How can women communicate assertively in, the workplace, especially when they work predominantly with men, in a way that will be effective and will not be seen as, on one hand, will not be seen as aggressive, but on the other hand, will serve them, right? Will not be apologetic or weak.
Right. Yeah. This is something I've really had to think about, because my position comes with very little actual authority. Like, I don't, in the structure of the company, get to just make people do things. But I want to change behavior and motivate them to do things. So what we're talking about here is for a lot of people, is cultivating influence, maybe in the absence of authority. But if you have that authority, you still want influence, right? So this really, you got to think about this. You want buy-in. You want people to believe in what you're doing and what you're saying, and think that you know what you're doing and that you deserve to be there, right? These are the goals. So persuasion is actually underneath all of this. And it's very hard to get out of our own way, because we're coming into a situation with our own nervousness and apprehension and our own goals. But what you've really got to do when you prepare for the tough meeting, and any amount of preparation, 30 seconds if you got it, 2 hours if you got it, any amount of taking a deep breath and reflecting on the person across the table that you have to convince is worth doing. So a lot of self-help books, a lot of personal development focus on you internally. And, we think about that a lot. We listen to podcasts, we read those books, we talk to other women, we talk to coaches about our internal selves. But what I have found most successful is something that's called empathy mapping. And if you search this on the internet, you're going to get some different diagrams, empathy mapping. And a lot of the articles are going to be on selling a product that's really been embraced. And maybe you're not selling a product. I'm not in sales, but I am selling an idea. But it's also, empathy's in the phrase here, right? We're thinking about how the other person is hearing you, how they're feeling. How can we structure the conversation or the meeting to get to a yes? How can we make it as easy as possible for them to give us what we want? And that's not coming in hot, that's not like coming in, pointed conversation and being hostile. Now, because I deal with sexual harassment, I always think I'm right. I am against sexual harassment, so I was like, I could come in to every meeting and scold people and have the moral high ground and feel really justified in that, because these things should not be happening. People should be safe in our workplace. So I've got all of that righteous indignation, going into every single conversation, but that's not an effective way to cultivate influence and bring people with me. So I do try to be very welcoming and not intimidating, at least at first, right? Because for me also, they probably are worried about a conversation with me. They're probably worried they're in trouble. So I'm trying to soften that at the beginning, to be approachable, and to be very human. So you try to build some rapport. It's not a bad idea to be like, do you want to get coffee? You take those few moments at the beginning to really humanize the experience before you make your ask. So if we're not comfortable being assertive, people really have like given themselves the pep talk to just go in and do it, but they're trying to just get it out of the way. And if that's how it comes across, you're kind of just blurting out your ask. That's not, you've done the thing, which kudos, right? Like, so it's going to be bumpy as you learn this and as you start trying, but really taking that breath and being like, okay, it's not so much I am prepared, right? I am prepared, but how can I communicate that to them and structure your approach really focused on the other person? The quick tip, which the tip everyone really needs, is you need to practice. So let's stop waiting until you need to negotiate your salary once every like 3 or 4 years or whatever, because what you're doing then is trying to cram the night before, and you're nervous and you're like, oh, I don't want to do this, but I know I'm supposed to do this. We've gotten all these messages about how we're supposed to advocate for ourselves in the workplace. But if it's not your daily practice, that's going to feel really hard. That's going to feel exhausting, right? And you're not going to be the best at it. It's just like anything else. It's just like exercise. It's just like, whatever expertise your career's in. It's like any craft or skill. The more you've practiced it, the easier it will be when you need to do it. So I'd like people to start asking for small things where the stakes are very low, where you don't need to get the yes, or start participating in meetings. Just say something. If it's hard for you to participate in a meeting, where you can start with nodding. You can start with agreeing with a coworker and be like, I agree what John says over here, and just get used to speaking up more, so that when you need to, and when you need to stand alone, maybe you disagree, it doesn't feel like climbing a mountain, right? And it will actually feel easy. And then once you get those small wins, it becomes self-perpetuating because they feel good. You feel effective. You feel the reward, right? And that builds influence over time. You can't build influence without showing up and engaging. And you have a right to be there. They hired you to do a job. You have just as much a right to be there and a need to be there. We talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion, we talk about belonging. We need people to be able to show up and bring themselves into those conversations to make our workspaces more reflective of our society. And so it is its own reward once you start doing it, both personally, even professionally, but also for others, right? Because we are doing the work of diversifying the viewpoints that are being shared in all of those work conversations.
Absolutely. And I really agreed with what you mentioned about taking small steps and practicing, right? Practicing that muscle.
It is. It's muscle. I mean, the small steps can be like, if you are walking down a sidewalk, who moves out of the way, right? Now, I'm not saying be rude in any way. I would like, and like we should move for the elderly, or like anyone who needs the space, we're going to give them the space. But we're making decisions, like if we get on a plane, who gets the armrest, who gets more space, right? And who folds themselves in and takes up less space. We're making all sorts of decisions that make women in particular make themselves smaller, accommodate others. And this is no one has to know you're practicing. These are teeny tiny ways to figure out where you are on your assertiveness journey and test the boundaries. Claim that armrest. See how that feels for a little, I mean, I don't really, for me, I'm not trying to like touch the stranger next to me. So eventually I might lean this way, but have that little unspoken power struggle where you can and see how it feels. And then that's going to change your thinking, because why are they entitled to more, right? I mean, and it's gendered. It really is. You look on a plane, who's spread out, taking up, arm rest, leg rest, taking the exit row. And, I want people with larger framed bodies to be comfortable. It's not about taking away rights of other people or comfort from other people, but you too are also entitled to comfort and space and whatever tiny amount of that seat you paid for. like
Absolutely.
it's yours.
Yeah, and you touch a very important point here. It's not just about what we say; it's about the body language and our face expressions and how we actually,
Yeah.
behave in the meeting. So, any tips about kind of, things to notice about how you see it, how you communicate, like from your
Yes.
expressions, from your poster, from your, how you look, how you, any tips there?
Yes. I mean, I will tell you, and I've had years to think about this and hone my practice, but I dress and plan for my toughest meeting of the day. And I mean, to me, I'm real into this though, right? I've read I'm convinced by the research. If I know I need to convey power and I'm going to have a tough audience or I need to be aggressive, I do. I mean, I wear my red jacket, I might wear red lipstick, I probably do my sleeker hair. I'm trying to be fierce and convey that from the moment that they see me. And then when I come in the table, I pick a seat of like a power seat. I'm not going to go into the meeting where I need to be influential and sit along the wall and act like I don't belong there. You take a seat at the table. Now, you don't take the head of the table again, right? We don't want to like veer into aggressive. We're not doing an 80s like business movie, but I take a seat at the table toward, not next to, because then it gets awkward, but toward or across from the decision maker, and then I try to sit still. And that's kind of hard for me. I have some little, fidgeting thing that I do under the table. So if I need to fidget, I take, mostly I try to hold my hands together and do that under the table so that they're not fidgeting. Or I love to hold a pen. If it's a talk that I'm nervous about, I mean, I'm an academic, so I can have glasses and a pen, and it's part of the vibe. But nobody cares if you're holding a pen, but it gives you something to hold on to. And it can look like I'm doing it for emphasis. It doesn't have to be a nervous habit. Another thing is, to plant, to kind of put your feet into the floor, right? It's like a grounding practice. And we do this for other reasons, in yoga, you might do this in meditation. And the benefits apply wherever we are. Kind of just press your feet into the floor, try to maintain the best posture that you can, depending on your body, because we're trying to command attention. I mean, I even do it via Zoom. A few years ago, when we closed everything down, I was really worried. I was like, because I feel like so much of my ability to influence others works best in person.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a person who, I mean, I honestly, I embraced comfort like the rest of us, but I had earrings and a bright lipstick to like, because I choose to wear makeup. Not everyone has to, but I was like, I'm going to try to like command some attention through the screen and try to remain alert. I did a lot of the professional attire up top and then my comfortable, leggings or pajama pants at the bottom. And but when I gave a big talk on Zoom, I still put on a full outfit, including dress shoes, to have that posture that I was used to of like, that's when I feel most effective. And so I'm going to replicate that. Sometimes it's hard. I mean, I have friends who I love dearly, who are very warm and affectionate friends, but they're so expressive, they're giving themselves away in some of these tough meetings, right? So it's also about accepting the nonsense that might be coming at you and saving it for later. Sometimes, if you can save your annoyed reaction for when you're venting with your best friend later, that can really help you go far. That is not to say, because I just have to say very clearly, I do not think anyone should have to experience discrimination or harassment or be unsafe. At that point, be aggressive, do what you need to do, enforcing your boundaries. But if we're talking about what we're putting up with anyway on a regular basis, things we just don't like about someone else, then that's where, we might nod or disagree without overly engaging. Excuse me, sorry. Because we don't need to like visibly react and be a character. And that's going to make them feel defensive. And defensive is just not the position we want someone in if we're trying to get them to do what we want, right? We want them to feel accepted and welcoming, and like agreeing with us is the easy choice. So plenty of times I sit through meetings where people are saying things that I think are ridiculous, or I'm explaining something that I've explained before. I mean, there are so many minor annoyances in my day, but everyone does not have to know about those in real time, right? So it's about creating an outlet for that doesn't have to be at that time, strategically, to get you where you want. It's not about just taking it. I don't think we should just receive slight after slight and not deal with it, right? But when are you going to be better equipped to deal with it? When you've attained some sort of success, or the position or the raise, right? So we have more time than we think, and you can address those things probably later on in a situation where you actually are more empowered.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, those are so many incredible tips. Thank you so much. And can't believe, I mean, it's the time flies so much. So I wanted to ask you, how can women find you?
Sure. So I also have tried to get my brand in alignment, so if you search my name, Cara Tuttle, it should come up. So I have a website, which is the title of the book, drowningintimidity.com. And if you type in Drowning in Timidity, it's a pretty specific title. You can find it wherever books are sold, right? So it's at many retailers. It's a little guide, actually. I wanted to make it really digestible and really workable, and there's exercises in that. But there are also exercises available for free for download on my website, drowningintimidity.com. I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and we'll put all the links on the show notes.
Yes, so there are many links. So whatever you prefer, please reach out. I'm happy. As you can tell, I'm passionate about the topic. I love talking about this. I'd love to connect with anyone who wants to chat further.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cara. It's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you so much for having me.